Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Lentini, and I'm your host for the podcast Different Thinking for Different Times. And the work and the goal of my podcast is to help people expand their thinking. What I found over the years is that people get entrenched in certain positions and they have a monologue about it in their head. And then they start to tell other people that what happened to them or who's doing what to them, and they get entrenched and stuck in the story, and it precludes any other possibilities. And we live in something, I would say, limitless possibilities are available, and that we live in a miracle too. We're floating around. We're on a little marble floating around uh, an exposed nuclear fusion plant at the right exact spot for this miracle to occur called life. And there's always different options available with a dialogue, and I think help. Sometimes we need help. We need a different perspective. And that's my guest today. He provides different perspectives for people, and he helps people. His name is Bob Staines. Do you prefer Bob or Robert?
Yeah, Bob's good.
Bob's good. So Bob Staines, and he was introduced to me by a friend of mine that's been a licensed social worker and having different dialogues with people to resolve crises in their life or maybe even traumas. And Bob does, he's got an element of work that's fascinating. I'm going to let him describe it, but let me read you this that I found fascinating. One of the reasons that I thought Bob would be a great guest for the podcast. Bob is founder and principal of Bob Staines and Associates. And he's got over 30 years of experience working with deep divisions by consulting, coaching, training, facilitating, and mediating.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot for having me, Steve. It's great to talk with you, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk with a larger group of people about some of the challenges we face in our world and my little slice of helping people deal with those challenges. So I guess I'd start with where I met your colleague, your friend, Paul, who referred me. Was we were working together in a psychiatric unit in a general hospital. And I have a degree in mental health counseling, and of course, Paul's a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really there in that experience of seeing that we could help people when they came into the hospital and they would do really well. And then they would go back into their environment and have problems again. And then we'd see them in 6 months or a year down the line because the context around them did not change. So it kept supporting the same kind of dysfunctional patterns and behaviors. So I became very interested in looking at how can we change larger contexts to help people live more constructively. And first that was through family therapy. And then eventually I came to this discipline of dialogue 30 years ago that was actually created by family therapists using ideas from family therapy to help people in larger disputes around identities, values, and worldviews change the context of their conversations so that they can speak more constructively together. And I've had the chance to do that in a lot of different places, both directly working with people and training other folks to do the same thing. And, right now, for instance, we're in a particular moment in our country where we're approaching holiday dinners with family who may have voted differently from us. And a lot of people are thinking, how on earth am I going to have a conversation with that person?
And it doesn't matter the side they're on either, because both sides feel that way.
Yeah. So I'm actually doing a workshop on Thursday night. If anybody's interested, it's Therapy Training Boston, Thursday night from 6:30 to 8:30. It's free.
I'll say that again. Therapy Training
Boston.
Boston. Okay.
And I'm getting together with one of the founders of the Public Conversations Project, which was really the grandparent of the modern dialogue movement that started 35 years ago. Her name is Corky Becker. And we're going to do a workshop on how we can use dialogic ideas to help families have challenging conversations around this particular issue right now. But sort of taking some of the same ideas that we do for larger groups and applying them, going back into families again, which is where we started.
That's
So
great.
give me some guidance here because I'll just run on and run on.
No, that's great. I mean, I love the idea that you're talking about having a dialogue, and because we see people firmly entrenched in their thinking, how challenging has it been to get people to just open up a little bit, to maybe gather some evidence, uh, or maybe pay attention to evidence that their position might be, I'm not going to say not true, but could be softened a bit. How does that how does that happen over time? I mean, tell me about that.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of ways to look at conflict over like public issues, the kind of thing that you're mentioning. One is to look at the level of sort of evidence, policy, position, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that work.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really great group that, if folks are interested in that, there's a group called Braver Angels that
Braver
invites people
angels.
in to
Mm-hmm.
have conversations across political divides and talk about, reasons
Mm-hmm.
for believing.
Mm-hmm.
The method of dialogue that I practice is called reflective structured dialogue. And
Mm-hmm.
what it does is it invites people to change their relationships by changing the way they speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are coming to me, let's say we disagree about a political issue,
Mm-hmm.
um, I could very maybe fruitfully engage you in all the aspects of that issue,
Mm-hmm.
but that's probably not going to change our relationship very much.
Mm-hmm.
What I invite people to do is, if you tell me that you have a belief or that you voted for somebody different from me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just going to say, well, why did you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Give me your reasons, give me your evidence, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say something like, um, tell me about an experience you've had in your life that helped you form the values that led to your vote. And tell me
Mm-hmm.
about those values. And
Mm-hmm.
what is it that you hope will happen to our country as a result of the vote?
Mm-hmm.
And who are the influences on you as you've grown through the years on this particular set of values?
Mm-hmm.
So we're shifting from sort of fighting against each other to finding what's really interesting that's underneath people coming to the perspectives that they've come to. And that's
Yeah.
kind of at the essence of this approach to dialogue. We want to shift from um, talking conclusion to conclusion
Mm-hmm.
uh, down to talking human to human and rooted in the experiences that we've had together.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I ask people in the dialogue work to do is to think about um, any places where they may feel pulled in different directions. And
Mm-hmm.
most of us um, are not 100% anything, right?
True.
Uh, we have some places where we feel like, well, yeah, on the one hand, I voted, but my spouse didn't vote the same way I did. So I feel
Mm-hmm.
the loyalty and the love for my spouse and fidelity to my political perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
here I
Mm-hmm.
am wrestling with this. And it's in that wrestling when people talk about that together.
Mm-hmm.
When do we get a chance to talk about that together?
Mm-hmm. It's true.
When people do get a chance to talk about that together, um, they start to recognize each other in a different way. Oh, you wrestle too? And this came out in initial work that to create this model. It was 2 years of grounded theory research
Mm-hmm.
around the issue of abortion back in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And people were brought together in pro-choice and pro-life groups.
Mm-hmm.
Different methods of dialogue were tried. They were interviewed. What works, what doesn't work, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there were that 2 years of that work, and out of that, this approach was developed. That people felt like um, connecting on the level of experience and having the opportunity to talk about gray areas or being pulled in different directions were things that didn't normally come up in conversations across divides and led to more constructive relationships.
So you see where bridges were built, where once there was a bay between different thought
Yeah,
groups,
well,
and
I sometimes use the metaphor of when we hold something really tightly
yeah.
and someone else comes into our world that sort of threatens that belief that we
Mm-hmm.
have,
Mm-hmm.
um, that we retreat to castles of certainty, as I call them.
Oh.
Inside,
Mm-hmm.
the walls are all black and white.
Mm-hmm.
We lose the kind of texture, and we sort of see dimly through the windows across a chasm uh,
Mm-hmm.
that our
Mm-hmm.
opponent may be on the other side of.
Mm-hmm.
And in that chasm is all kinds of dangerous stuff: weeds, spikes, things that make it dangerous for us to walk there. So
Mm-hmm.
we need to find ways to build a bridge over that chasm. Um, and that's what we're doing with the power of dialogue.
That's great. So, how long does it take? I mean, are these kind of repeated sessions needed, or have you seen resolution? Quickly. What tends to happen? What have you experienced?
Well, it depends on. It's another one of those answers. It depends. It depends on the issue and the community that I'm working with.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
want to distinguish between having a formal dialogue that has, a invitation and a structure and a process and all the rest of that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and using dialogic tools. So
Okay.
any of us can
Mm-hmm.
ask the kind of question that I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me about an experience you've had that has informed your view? That's a dialogic way of engaging, and it doesn't have to be in a formal dialogue, right? So people can do that at the dinner table, um, and they're going to change the ways that they start to think and feel about each other if they stay with that, right?
Yeah.
Formal dialogue, um, can be anything from one session for people to come together to talk about a topic like abortion of
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3
Mm-hmm.
session in an evening,
Mm-hmm.
to multiple years. I've worked with groups over years that have been deeply divided. Um, that it's taken a very long time to sort through all the things that they want to talk about that support the division continuing, and to be able to engage enough that they want to work together to heal some of the fabric of community that's been torn
Mm-hmm.
by their divisions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think of an example. I do a lot of uh, work in the religious domain, so I work with churches and synagogues,
Mm-hmm.
interfaith groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with one Christian denomination for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 5-day retreat once a year for 3 years. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so there's all levels, all variations.
So, um, when you think of some of these issues where people get deeply entrenched, right? I mean, the example that you just used, um, it, what happens in the retreat, or and over a 3 year period? What do you see? Uh, I can't imagine everything gets resolved, and who knows, right? But is it that people have more empathy for those that they disagreed with, or
Well, generally in my work, it's not about resolution. It's
okay,
about some kind of transformation of conversation and relationship.
yeah,
So people start to identify the patterns that they've been stuck in terms of communication, and
mm-hmm,
how that has kept deep conflict going.
mm-hmm,
So in the case of that I just mentioned, this was a while ago. It was back in
mm-hmm,
the early 2000s.
mm-hmm,
And one of the things that they identified was this international group, people from 5 continents, was that
wow,
all their communication about difficult issues was on message boards and email, and not face to face. And it was all
wow,
point counterpoint.
wow,
So they walked through some of the issues that they had engaged on in that format, to
mm-hmm,
say, okay, what happens if we look at this theological issue through a relational way of communicating and not just attacking each other? And then how can we change our policies for communication so that we don't return to that again?
yeah, and we see so much of that today, message boards
Oh, yeah,
and all the
no good.
social media, people just
Social
going
media.
crazy, and nothing gets resolved. So really, to me, when I look at it, I don't spend much time. I don't do any replies. I don't even look at people replying to my own posts.
Yeah.
Uh,
But what
but
does change is how people relate to each other and feel about each other.
yeah,
So in
yeah,
that group, um, there were people who were still theologically very deeply divided, uh,
Hmm.
but they came to really express and feel deep, deep love and affection for one another.
Yeah, well, face to face, it's possible, and in the message boards and the chat rooms, that just seems to me to solidify the views, right? To further entrench people, and because sometimes, as you know, in social media, people can post some of the most hurtful and bizarre statements that often aren't even true. They're not based on any kind of uh, reliable information, right? The word disinformation became very popular, but
Yeah,
I think a lot of it, instead of disinformation, was personal attacks and people feeling
right.
confronted with others that had different views. And so, to your point, um, resolution doesn't have to be the goal,
Yeah.
but a
And
better understanding.
sorry, people imagine often
Mm-hmm.
I include myself in this.
Sure, me too.
We imagine that we know somebody. We
Yeah,
see a perspective or whatever, and we start to form this story in our head of that person, and we imagine that that's the story of who they are, and engage on that basis. And 9 times out of 10, we don't have the first clue about who
yeah,
that person really is, especially
yeah,
if they threaten us. If we feel threatened by them, we're automatically creating a story that's going to help us protect ourselves,
yeah,
and keep them at a distance, and lead to a lack of understanding.
yeah, yeah. And I read in your bio too that you do corporate work. So what do you find in corporations, and how typically do you help them, and what does that look like?
I have to say I don't do a lot of it, so
Mm-hmm.
just put that up front.
Sure.
The
Mm-hmm.
dynamics are pretty much the same, no
Mm-hmm.
matter where I'm working, and it's true in terms of working in different countries as well.
Mm-hmm.
I find the same dynamics. So right now, some of the work that I'm doing is helping people in corporations, and small and large,
Mm-hmm.
have conversations about the impact of the Israel-Gaza situation on
Mm-hmm.
relationships
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
the company.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a situation where, in a lot of places, people have either
Yeah.
started to argue, or at this point, they've gone into silence, but it's a simmering silence
Yeah.
where they feel opposed to each other, but they have no way to engage that constructively. So I'm helping to create listening sessions and opportunities for people to come to deeper understanding of how that conflict has had an impact on them, and more importantly, how it's impacted the culture of how people connect with each other.
Mm-hmm. That's the key, especially in any organization, whether it's a not-for-profit or a corporation. Any like you said, it could be a church organization,
Yeah,
where there's groups of anywhere where there's groups of people that there's going to be differences.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
one of the other sort of themes that I work with is values.
mm-hmm,
So where, let's say, I'm working with a financial services investment firm,
mm-hmm,
and some of the people have very strong religious views, and
mm-hmm.
they are opposed to the company doing tobacco investments.
Oh, sure, yep, yep.
Uh,
There's been a lot of publicity about that over the last 5, 6, 10
yeah,
years. Yeah.
and there are other places where people have very strong moral and value commitments, um, and they have a challenge in terms of just a sort of broad sweep that we're going to make money the best way that we possibly can make money.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help people have that conversation, have that values conversation? First, is the company open to that? Not,
Right.
in my experience, not too many companies are. But
Mm-hmm.
then again, they would probably not come to me; they go to somebody else. But that is an example of the kind of work that I do in
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
setting. Or another example would be a family business where there are
Yeah.
uh, either different political views, like I've
Mm-hmm.
done this, in the last election a couple cycles ago, where there were different political views that divided the directors of a family business, and it was affecting their ability to do their work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have conversations about that, and Also in family business, there are succession issues, and you know, when the founders age and start to have some challenges,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
have those conversations. That's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and in family business, it could even be just one side of the family versus another. I've witnessed that
mm-hmm.
because there'd be cousins or there'd be a brother working with their uncle because the father's partner is still alive and the father's gone, and now there's that pull.
Yeah.
And is it a similar process in situations like that where it's different sides of the
Yes.
family?
So in those situations, there are some situations in which I work where um, dialogue is the beginning of a larger process. So
Mm-hmm.
where, let's say, decisions have to be made and policies have to be changed,
Mm-hmm.
we'll start with dialogue, so people can change the ways they talk and change their relationships and really shift the conversational culture of the organization
Mm-hmm.
before they go and try to solve the knotty problems.
Mm-hmm.
And then once this is solid, then they can have a different way of engaging around things like, how are we going to change this policy? What are we going to do about this relationship,
Mm-hmm.
etc.
I mean, is there a basis for them having the same goal? They want the company to survive. Is that
Yeah, well,
sometimes a place
that's
to
one of the
start,
things.
or?
And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I often talk about is what gets lost often in the midst of these conflicts is what I call the transcendent purpose. So, what is the
Uh,
transcendent purpose of the family, of the
mm-hmm.
couple, of the
Mm-hmm.
business, of the
Mm-hmm.
church, whatever? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's stuck down here at this. I want this.
I'm
No,
going
I
to
want
make a
that.
note of
No,
that.
I want that.
Transcendent purpose.
But what's the larger purpose that this organization serves and that
Yeah.
you serve, or what
Yeah.
is the larger purpose that this family serves? And once people are have a shared understanding of that, they can articulate that,
Yeah.
then it becomes much easier to have these other conversations and move forward.
Yeah. Now, when you mentioned the dialogic approach, you had a whole, was it resolute dialogic? What was the terminology you
Oh,
gave that?
reflective, structured dialogue.
Reflective.
And
I love that.
the home
Structured dialogue.
reflective, structured dialogue, and it's a approach that began in 19 with the Public Conversations Project in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
And the Public Conversations Project is now called Essential Partners. They're located in Cambridge, Mass. And they
Mm-hmm.
are sort of the headquarters. There are
Mm-hmm.
now thousands and thousands of people around the world that do this work that have been trained. But Essential Partners is sort of home base. And if your listeners are interested, there
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of resources on their website. It's called whatisessential.org.
What
And there are
is,
resources for having dialogues about many different kinds of issues.
yeah, and we'll mention that again too before we close. Whatisessential.org. There, I got another one in
Yeah.
for you. Reflective, structured dialogue. I love that because so many people get stuck in their own monologue, right? Which is defined by Webster's, I think, or maybe Oxford, as the story one tells oneself, the
Right.
monologue, right?
Exactly. And I could say a little bit about those words if
Yeah,
would
I'd
be
love
helpful.
that. Yeah.
So if you think of conversation that's out of control, like
Mm-hmm.
arguments and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
we use the metaphor of creating a container for a different kind of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some of the elements of that container are opportunities for reflection. So I want to think before I speak. I want to give
Mm-hmm.
people prompts to think about before they come to a session.
Yeah. Yes.
For every question I give them, I want to give them time to reflect and think first before they speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I want them to reflect on what other people have said. So there's a lot of time and pauses.
Mm-hmm.
So we have reflection on one's own self and what one hears in a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Structure. So when we get involved in arguments, if you've ever gone to like a town hall meeting or whatever, it's,
Yes.
kind of chaotic and wild, and the loudest voices drive things, and right, it escalates pretty quickly. So in this model, we have very tight to begin with structure. So I'll put a question out to the group, and everybody gets 1 or 2 minutes to respond. With you respond,
I
nobody
love that.
talks. There's
Mm-hmm.
pauses between people,
Mm-hmm.
around and around.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that holding container, and then agreements that we
Mm-hmm.
make together for how we're going to speak and how we're not going to speak. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually working with a group right now on the issue of firearms.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we're doing is we're learning from the people that are going to participate. What are the hot button words that the other side could say that would just push you off the rails?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to bring that to the whole group and say, here's what you told us about the hot button words.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to make an agreement to avoid these words for the purpose
I
of
love that.
conversation? And the
Yeah.
same thing about, I'll ask, well, what's gotten in the way before? What keeps the pot boiling? And a lot of times I'll hear, well, people interrupt each other. So we'll create an agreement. We're not going to interrupt. So reflective structured dialogue. And then there's an exchange where people get to ask each other what we call questions of genuine interest. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if you speak for, in a go around fashion for a half an hour or so,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the number of people,
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing a lot of stuff that I can be really curious about. Now,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a normal sort of argumentation, debate conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I'm pulling for things that I can use to attack you or unmask you or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
see how you're not informed about your topic. But in this, people are committed to listening for the purpose of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to you, but I'm also taking notes and thinking, well, I want to know more about that. I want to
Right.
know more about that.
Right.
And then I can ask you a question about that. I can give you a quick example. Do we have time for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I did a lot of work in Finland on refugee resettlement.
Mm-hmm.
In the initial work, we did a dialogue with policy makers, advocates, recent immigrants, and citizens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there were 3 rounds of questions that had to do with what's your experience that's informed your perspective on immigration, and a couple of
Mm-hmm.
other questions.
Mm-hmm.
People were listening. And when it came time to ask each other questions, there was a policymaker in the group who
Mm-hmm.
later said he had never actually had a direct conversation with an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, you have been here for 20 years, and I'm curious about why it is you say that you feel that you haven't really been seen.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Mm-hmm.
And then she went on to say all the experiences that she had of being kind of rendered invisible at the
Mm-hmm.
store, at work, out in society.
Mm-hmm.
And this man came away with an understanding that was like 10 times deeper than he had before, because he asked the really useful question instead of using a question as kind of a weapon. So that's part of the process that deepens people.
Well, and I love that because it's based on a dialogue, and that you gradually get there. There's a process to get there. And I love the container concept, because that's like a way for people to even picture it in their mind. That drew a picture in my mind of a container.
Right.
And I could see that like off to the side for now, right? And we can come back to that container later and open it up, and let's have another dialogue about that. And that's a great way to kind of structure a process, at least in my mind, right? And
then what happens is people will take elements of that back into their lives. Like last week, I was doing a training at a YMCA out in the Midwest. I was training dialogue facilitators. And they participated in 2 dialogues as part of their training. As regular old participants, right? And immediately when the training was finished, when I got home, I flew home and I opened my email, and one of the participants said, "Thank you so much. I've already used what I learned with my girlfriend and my family at the dinner table."
wow.
So people take this and take these experiences and apply them right away in their relationships, and that's one of the things that I love about it.
I get that. I get that. And I love that. Is a lot of your work with dialogue facilitators training people to, because I think to me that spreads the, that's like the bee is pollinating, right? And
Yeah.
getting more of the word out. Is that what a lot of your work is today?
Yeah. I mean, I've always, I've been training people for many decades.
Mm-hmm.
But now the proportion of my work that is training and mentoring, because I also have a separate mentoring and training program to
Mm-hmm.
deepen facilitators, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, most of the work that I'm doing now is to prepare facilitators. But I feel like at this point in my life, that's the best use of my time. It's the highest leverage use of my time.
Yeah, it's multiplying the impact.
Right. Yeah. So if I can train one facilitator, one facilitator who even just does 5 dialogues during a year of 8 people, that's 40 people
Yeah.
that I've reached by training that one person.
Yeah.
And multiply that by a class of 20 over, multiplied several months over the number of people that I can do. And it's, it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It must be rewarding.
It's very rewarding. And especially this, the thing that I mentioned about, it's called Transforming Dialogue. It's my training, mentoring, and group
Mm-hmm.
coaching program.
Mm-hmm.
I created that because you can teach somebody to do the basics in workshops and classes in grad school and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's really not enough time to go deeply into the practice and the inner work that you have to do.
Yeah.
My friend Duncan Holloman, psychologist up here in Gloucester, talks about the inner work of outer work.
Yeah.
That in order to be present in these places where we have deep identity conflicts like race and gender and sexual orientation.
Sexual identity today. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
For us as practitioners to be deeply present to everybody in the room, not just to the people we like, it takes a lot of
Yeah.
internal work to understand what are our vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
what buttons could be pushed in us, who might we favor, where does that come from in us, what do we do when that happens, how do we lean on the structure, all that stuff. And that, for me, when you mentioned the word rewarding, is probably the most rewarding thing that I'm doing right now. I don't do much of it because it's a big commitment. People commit to once a week, 2 hours for 6 months. That means that I'm committed to the group for that amount of time.
Right.
But I really, really enjoy that.
Yeah. And how about the mentoring? That must be rewarding. So then how does that work?
Is, get people together in a group, and they go through an online curriculum of 20 lessons of me. They get stuck with looking at me for lessons with PowerPoints, and there are readings and there are assignments for people to do. And then when they come in groups in the group, they talk about the particular assignment that they've done. One of which is to say that I just mentioned, what are some of the things that your soft points that somebody could push on that would lead you to have a negative reaction in a session. We'll talk about that together, and I'll give advice about that. Or if people are doing application out in the community, I have one guy, for instance, who was very concerned about things that were happening on the school board in his town. So he went to the school board and said, I'd like to offer my services for free to facilitate some dialogue about the issues that are coming before the school board. And then so I helped him do the invitation, the outreach, the design, consulting him while he was facilitating. And that's the kind of thing, everybody's bringing those experiences in and getting some guidance from me going along the way. And then also I have a way that people can connect with me individually if they want to get some more individual guidance about what they're working on and their own sort of profile as a facilitator.
Yeah, wow! I love the potential impact of that, and then teaching dialogue facilitators. The one thing that to me was when they get a a button activated, right? When they get activated by a question, what is the strategy, right, to help them? Can you imagine the dialogue facilitator all of a sudden responding right in a way that wouldn't be positive?
Unfortunately, yes, I've seen it. And I know also I have compassion because I know how hard it is.
Yeah.
If you have strong feelings about something, and and somebody is saying the exact opposite, and you have a passion about that, and you think that they're really contributing to the deterioration of the world
Mm-hmm.
by their perspective, it's tough to hold back.
So, what
And
strategy do you give them to use in that
so
moment?
I use the metaphor. There was a time in my life when I was on my way to becoming a minister, a
Mm-hmm.
long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I decided not to do that. I didn't go to seminary.
Mm-hmm.
But the metaphor of that, or the image of that, that the minister or the priest or the rabbi um, can't pick and choose who they're going to be nice to and who they're not going to be nice to. They're
Mm-hmm.
responsible for everybody. They're
Mm-hmm.
responsible to bring the same amount of love to that person that they disagree with as they would
Mm-hmm.
to the person they agree with. Same
Mm-hmm.
as facilitators. We talk about being multi-partial. So my job, and what I teach my facilitator trainees about their job, um, is priestly in a certain way, because you need to be present for the person, not for the position, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and the nice thing about this process is, as facilitators, we're getting to know that person underneath the position.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's much easier for me to engage someone when I really understand where they're coming from, what their history is, all the rest of that stuff. And when
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the room with them, to be as present to them as I am to folks that, I agree with. Um,
I love that because it's a great reminder is that underneath the acceptance or not tolerance, but the acceptance of all the different views and different positions people can take is really love, that they're
it
a
is.
human, right? That they're a human. And then as a facilitator, right? A dialogue facilitator, how important is that? It's very much like you said, priestly or ministry or rabbi, rabbinic, right? It's all of those. And it's funny you mentioned you wanted to be a minister because I did want to be a priest and went to a Catholic high school that I paid for myself. My parents, with 7 children, both working people, couldn't afford the private Catholic school, so I worked and paid for the school. And then at some point in time, I decided no, I wasn't going to go to seminary.
Uh-huh.
But so we have that commonality.
And you're right about love. I learned a lesson about this back when Paul and I worked together. When I first started working on that unit, I had a BA in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And the medical director there, the psychiatrist Howard Stone, wonderful man,
Mm-hmm.
had us doing all kinds of stuff that I didn't understand why I was being given so much responsibility. So I asked him one time I think I was there for just a couple of weeks, and I said, Dr. Stone, why am I doing like examinations in the emergency room and making the decision whether to admit somebody or not? I just have a BA in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, um, uh, I look for one criterion in bringing someone on and hiring them, and that is, can you love people? He said, that is the core. If you can
Mm-hmm.
love people, I can teach you to do anything that I can teach any psychiatric resident to do. You can do it all if you
Mm-hmm.
have love. If you don't have it, then you can't do this work,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I've added to that when I talk about people ask me what I look for in a facilitator. Uh, and it's, can they love people? And then the
Mm-hmm.
second thing is, can they keep their mouth shut?
Yeah.
Um,
How
because a
key is
lot of
that?
what we do is also um, not about us. It's about the people,
Yeah.
and we get out of the way. We create that container, and we invite them into it, and then we step back, and they have their own conversation, and we don't do the hub of the wheel thing.
Yeah.
We let them hold that conversation themselves, keeping our mouths shut.
Yeah. And I think that both of those are very important, whether it's a coach or a trainer or facilitator, dialogue facilitator, any of those human, I guess I would say human facilitators, right? They're working with bridging gaps between different thinkers and different groups of people. Yeah, those two qualities are really important.
And sometimes when I'm training facilitators, this comes up. Um, well, what if I disagree with somebody?
Yeah.
And or what if the person is really wrong, and shouldn't I bear witness, social justice, etc.? And I say, you have somebody in your life that you really care about. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine that you were really in conflict, and you were going to go to a counselor together to try to work through your conflict and have a better relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You go in for your first session, and after about 5 minutes, you discover that the counselor really favors the other person and is asking them the interesting questions and is commenting on what they have to say. And you're feeling the cold shoulder. How's that going to work out? Right?
Yeah.
People get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it reminds me of a time where someone told me up front that that's what they were going to do for to set up the. I'm going to seem like I'm going to be against you in the beginning, and then I'm gonna flip it over to the other person. That was their personal philosophy about how to bridge a gap in a relationship, and it actually didn't work so well.
Yeah.
Making one side right and then switching to the other side. Right.
Yeah. It's like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? You do that and it's out there and that's resonating in the air now and you can't take it back. You can do the switching and all that stuff, but
Yeah. So, they thought that was going to be a positive way. Anyway, I just love the work that you're doing. And I think it's so important in this world where we see so many people ensconced in one side or the other. And it's happening in not just in politics, it's happening in companies, it's happening in universities, it's happening, it's happening in religion, it's happening in so many places. So I think it's important that people hear it and maybe we've got 31 countries listening now, not that many people in all the different countries, mostly in the US, but we have people in 31 countries listening. And that's the goal. I want to have people have a dialogue and think about different ways and find different sources and resources to find a new way of thinking, to expand one thinking from, I was looking for the acorn I keep on my desk, but
yeah, your acorn.
It's supposed to be the amygdala, which brain surgeons and neuro researchers have told me, Steve, it's supposed to be a walnut.
Right.
I like the acorn. Number one, it's easier to break open. And that was my thought about it. And it grows into an oak tree in the right conditions. And we can all do that. And we need help. I find that it's so important to ask and get different perspectives because Dr. James Doty, he wrote the book Mind Magic, and he started out as a brain surgeon, which led him curious. Now he's a neuro researcher and amazingly, now a metaphysician as well. And what he talked about in the brain is that if you think of it just in a simpler way, he said that we need 10% to be operating. Now you got 90% left. 45% of that is growing hair. I mean, for some of us, obviously it's working well for you. And, and beating our heart. We don't have to go, oh, come on, I got to remember to beat my heart. All the things we don't have to think about. Then he said the remaining 45%, think of it this way. And I loved it because it's simple for people to get. A file system and a bloodhound. And that whatever you put in the file system, the bloodhound is going to go looking for evidence of, despite any evidence to the contrary. And scientists call that confirmation bias. And I think that's a big part of what you have to overcome with the work you're doing. You're doing it with a dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that I follow a different scholar that has a bit of a different way of talking about it than Siegel and the two.
I like Dan's work. Yeah, I've read some of his work. Yeah,
I love Rick Hansen because he's got this folksy way of talking about stuff, and he says the brain is Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good.
I love that as well. I love that as well.
Sort of what you were saying about the file cabinet, that when we feel threatened, he talks about we refer to past schema.
Mm.
Like we refer to past experiences that we've had that come up in us, and we start to respond as if we were in that situation.
And that's a past. That's where the subconscious got trained from a past experience, or multiple past experiences that were similar, maybe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we can do in the dialogue work is create that container that's safe enough for people to let go of the need to revert to those schema because they feel
Yeah.
less threat.
Yeah. Well, and neuro researchers are finding as they do that, right, with guidance from people like you, they're actually developing new neural pathways.
Right.
There's the brain has neuroplasticity, and that by challenging some of their long held beliefs, or even like you said, they're in the castle and they're defending, right, from the attack, the so-called attack from the outside, they can find a way and it takes some of that reprogramming.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the work, the type of work you're doing, because it has to be a dialogue. And I love the idea that it's structured, reflective, structured dialogue. And I love the image of the container. I think it's so important.
Yeah.
I'm making it very simple. And I can tell you, and the people listening, it'll make a difference. Find a way. Reach out to Bob, even if you have to find a dialogue facilitator. I'm sure he could refer you and maybe do the work for you, depending on the organization. And Bob is going to tell you honestly, like he said here, he's a man of integrity. He said, well, honestly, that's not the way. I don't work with a lot of corporations, but here's what I do. I work with family or businesses and large organizations like the YMCA and religious groups and nonprofits. He's going to tell you whether it's a fit or not. And I love that. I love that because I think that's always been my philosophy about selling. Help people buy, and if you can help them, find them some help, even if it's not you. And I love that about Bob. Now, I want you to tell people now how they can find you.
Sure. Well, there are actually two different websites.
Okay.
There's bobstains.com, which is my general website for all the different kinds of work that I do.
All right. Bob Stains, STAINS, right? .com. Okay. Bobstains.com.
Stains.com. And then there's, for my mentoring program, transforming-dialogue.com.
Okay. Transforming-dialogue.com.
And if people want to connect with me, my email, the best way is via email, which is rrstains@yahoo.com.
rrstains@yahoo.com. Yeah. Well, folks, it's been a fascinating dialogue, as evidenced by our back and forth. And without a dialogue, right, nothing gets accomplished. You can stay stuck in the monologue, and that little bloodhound or the Velcro it'll stick, because the part of what is so strong in humans is we want to be right. And we forget how that makes others wrong. And to just stop for a second and say, well, I might not be right, and who cares? Let's find out. Maybe there's a new way. Maybe there's another thought to have. And you're not going to have it without a dialogue. And it's so exciting that there are people doing this work. And Bob's been doing it for 30 years or more, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so reach out to Bob Stains, bobstains.com. Yes?
Yep.
And then say you're mentoring again?
Transforming-dialogue.
Transforming-dialogue.com. It's been a pleasure, Bob.
Same here. Thank you.
And anything I can do to help you, I will let you know when it's posted. It'll be on my Twitter, which has almost 16,000 followers.
Oh.
And I'm not bragging. It's just fact. Walter Brennan used to say that in his TV show, no brag, just fact.
Where are you dating yourself?
Yeah, I am. And then I have other platforms as well, and I'm going to make sure it gets out on all of them. And then from time to time, you'll notice I'll post about the work you do, because I really think it makes a difference in the world. And that's the goal of different thinking for different times. I want people to just consider something new and get help with it, because we've all been stuck in our minds with something.
I love the title, by the way, Different Thinking for Different Times. That's great.
It just came to me one day, and it was 5 years ago, and I started it, and I love it. It just to get people to consider that what we live in too is infinite, and we don't even understand that. The human brain doesn't comprehend that well,
Yeah.
and that's like a guide for us to expand our thinking. That can we become more like this infinite thing that we live in? And that's what I'm urging people to do, to go from small-minded thinking to infinite thinking. And the work that Bob Staines does is going to help do that. So make sure you all reach out to Bob and work on yourself. Bob mentioned that as well. That's the part of the biggest work for all of us to do. I'm still doing it. So the bad news for all of you is it's a journey. There's no destination.
Lifelong journey.
It's a long journey, and I'm grateful to be on it. And I'm grateful Bob took the time out to be a guest, and grateful that Paul, our mutual friend, referred Paul Scolio, who's a licensed social worker in the North Shore in Boston. He in all our dialogue over the years, he thought of Bob and said, I think Bob would be a great guest. That's certainly been true. I'm grateful. Thank you, Bob.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.